Hi, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see so many friendly names on the chat and plenty of new names I look forward to getting to know. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura, and I've worked in live entertainment for over 25 years. I started in screens control with media servers when they came into the market in the early 2000s, and I've seen firsthand the incredible change this industry has gone through in the last 20 years. Change that keeps accelerating and is in a deep and radical pivot in response to the pandemic. But the motivation to start Framework began years ago. My partners and I have long sought a way to celebrate and support the community represented here. This weekend is the beginning of a community building initiative for the collective of artists, programmers, producers, and engineers that deliver visual imagery and virtual environments to screens. The conference began as a way to engage with each other and to improve our practice and our relationship to the industry we work in. Now, Framework has become a resource that we may support each other through this disruption to our work and an opportunity to improve our diversity. We make change through communication. The more we understand about each other, the better we can advocate for our work, our teams, and our wellness for the future. We often work in the shadows while responsible for an ever-growing amount of visual real estate, both physical and virtual. The very definition of screen is changing as we talk about it, and we are inventing the future as we are living it. I can't think of a better time to come together in support of our business practices and our work-life wellness. Before we start, a little housekeeping. We are webcasting here at hopin.to and sending a backup to this link, uruconnect.com/framework. If there are any issues on Hopin, please make your way to our backup link, which can also be found on the Hopin reception page for this event. We have 4 30-minute sessions today, and we'll pause for a 15-minute break after the first 2. Questions to our panelists can be submitted in the chat area, which I see most of you have already found. It's on the right side of the Hopin webpage. We will do our best to answer questions, but if we are not able to get to them in our short 30-minute sessions, you can visit with some of our panelists during the social hour to ask your questions directly. There are also moderators monitoring chat if you have any technical issues. We will do the best we can to help. Social hour will happen at 1:15 p.m. EDT in the sessions area of Hopin platform. You will be tempted to go check it out before the panels are complete, but resist your curiosity. The fun doesn't start there until 1:15 p.m. EDT. I am thrilled to have you here, and I look forward to building our community together. Now I will introduce you to our first panel, moderated by Trevor Burke. They will be discussing Future 101, a panel on preparing yourself for the technologies driving the future of live events. Over to you guys.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Laura, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the first panel of the first Framework Conference. I'm Trevor Burke, your moderator of Future 101. And before we get going, I want to really quickly introduce you around the panel. First off, Matt, a leader in the touch designer community, both from a project standpoint, but also from an education and resource empowerment standpoint. Has dedicated a lot of times to a really large archive of teaching resources for the creative coding community at large, and a real powerhouse across the board with a background in performance, and now, a leader in thought and technology. Next up, Sharon, true industry polymath, background in lighting design, programming, worked in touring, opera, and more. She spent time on the manufacturing side of things, lived all over the world in this community and in this industry. When she was in manufacturing, worked on the sales and support side, and currently teaching lighting at the University of Cincinnati, CCM. Ben has a background in motion design, where he's has had a hand in creating and producing visuals for touring and events on the highest level, and he is currently teaching at Miami University of Ohio. And myself, I'm Trevor Burke, with a background in lighting design, got into projection, video along the way, with parallel paths working at opera and Disney. Got me to where I am today, or split time as a screens producer for music variety style broadcast award shows, and a creative producer. So there's more on all of our bios on the community website. Feel free to go check that out, but I want to, with short time, launch into the panel. the state of the world, what it is, makes it feel a little bit more than ever now that the ability to learn is important. And I think there might be a little truth in that, but we were all talking the other day, in reality, it's always been a moving target, and it's always been really important for all of us to have the ability to and keep ourselves fresh and understand what's around the corner. So as opposed to kind of a lot of the resources out in the world were kind of high level and, take tutorials or read a book or whatever it is, we love to take this little bit of time as a panel to speak from our own perspective and get a little bit more granular on learning and learning styles and learning techniques. So that being said, I'd love to kind of launch this conversation with the question and prompt for the group of specifically, being self-reflective of how all of us learn, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and specific, in getting into specifics on certain topics that have gotten you there along the way. Does anyone, Sharon, you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. The way that I learn on reflection has three key components. There needs to be obviously a project or an area of interest. I have to have a deadline, and I have to have accountability. And after we were talking about this the other day, I started realizing how important accountability is. And that's largely the structure of school too. It's like, here we go, here's a project, a deadline, and accountability. And I think that us being in the entertainment industry, broadly speaking, the accountability is built in because there is an audience coming at some point, or there's a deadline, or there is someone on the other end of that. But right now, that's not exactly happening. So I'm constantly right now looking for ways to manufacture the accountability and the deadlines for myself. And whether that's by creating a group of people where we're going to collaborate on something that may or may not have any audience, that's great. That's a form of accountability. And it's something that I'm doing now with a group of faculty here. Like, let's create a structure for ourselves where I have something I want to learn, they have something they want to learn, and we'll make a container that has deadlines attached and that we're holding each other accountable for it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, it's like when I first started learning how to program, it's like you can only do so much by writing the 3 cues and doing a blue look and a red look. But then when you get into a show, you're actually solving real problems and and that is part of the accountability in a project. So.
And Trevor, that's just one more. There's a great point you just made there, that as soon as the project deadline and accountability are there, I'm forced into issues that I would not have foreseen. I'm forced to solve problems that I could not have created for myself. And that's massively important. And it's happening under a deadline, so I can't procrastinate it. And I used to think that this was really selfish, that I couldn't do anything without a witness somehow. But now I think that's just a built-in part of our industry, and it's fantastic and worth celebrating.
Awesome. Totally. Matt?
Oh, thank you. It's interesting, reflecting on this process, having been an actor turned into a technologist. I think it's a weird kind of space to enter. Ben was saying, the fact that there is some accountability that you have, I think of that as from my actor's days as being stakes, right? There's something at stake, and there's a reason that I have to do this. And I would also echo that I approach these challenges from the perspective of having some problem to solve. So I have to have a problem that I'm trying to solve. There needs to be something at stake. And then I think the other piece that I've really come to reflect on and find valuable is that I need some form of iteration, right? I've got to make it okay for myself that the first time I do it, it's probably going to be terrible. And the second time, hopefully, is a little better. And the next time is a little better. And to remind myself that iteration is a built-in part of the learning process. So we're not perfect the first time we do it. We'll probably be really bad the first time we do it. But we have to really challenge ourselves to return and build a rhythm out of the discipline of repeating something again and again.
I think that makes sense. And I think one of the things that's really, I think the thing that can feel daunting about that iteration is when you think about where you want to get and you think that all of those iterations are potentially not right until they're right, but in actual truth, each iteration is just more right than the last one. So it doesn't actually feel like each one feels like an accomplishment, but if you just look at it and you're kind of, I can feel very like paralyzed by the idea of, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn before I can get to that level or the ability to do it like that person. But if you kind of just look at it, it's like the same as a career. Like you're just on your, and every step is your own personal step, and it's important to take them. Matt, I have a question. You're talking about it's important to have a problem to solve. Like, how are you finding? What about now? Because there's a lot of people have a lot less problem. I mean, Sharon too. Like, there's a lot less problems to solve. So, are you manufacturing problems? Because I can sometimes you feel those like get a little thin. It feels like oh, it's just a paper prompt, and then it goes back to accountability. So, have you been facing that at all?
It's an interesting time for folks that are more kind of firmly rooted in the technology portion of some of our equations, because we're now faced with the problems that we hadn't devoted much time to before. What happens when our entire audience is remote? What's going to happen when our audience is mixed, co-located, and remote? How are we going to create meaningful experiences on both sides of that transaction? So for me right now, the problems feel like there's lots of them to think about. Even pieces like this, how do we begin to imagine a remote broadcast process where the crew and all the lovely people helping make this possible are not located in the same place where we are? Right. And what does troubleshooting look like in that kind of scenario?
Right. But okay, awesome. And I'm just going to push a little bit. What about in previous times? Like when you're kind of don't have the world on your shoulders and you're feeling stale and you're just kind of sitting there with nothing to do. How do you self-motivate? Do you self-manufacture a problem? Do you go find something you want to solve and just start like blue sky? Like where do you jump in?
Forums have become my motivating place, because in forums for any number of platforms, there is an endless sea of questions and problems that other people have. And sometimes you can borrow that other person's problem to motivate yourself to try and figure out like, how would I fix that? I might not need to know how to fix that today, but I might need to know a technique for that tomorrow or the day after or the day after. So for me, participating in those communities has become an avenue for kind of problem solving and head scratching that I might not have encountered just in my own kind of siloed portion of the world.
That's awesome. So you're in the forums, actively participating, reading them, and just sometimes inspiration strikes by seeing what other people are working on.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Ben, tossing to you, same question.
Well, I would say, I'm aligned with both Matthew and Sharon, which is, you have to have a problem to solve. I think you can only do so many tutorials, but you've got to give yourself a mountain to sort of climb. I would add to that, I think one of the reasons I got into the business with all you crazy people in live entertainment was, there is a challenge that you have to give yourself, and it's sort of a what if. And so starting as an editor, then moving to motion design, I was always interested in what happens when these two things get plugged into each other, or what happens when you try to make something huge, or what happens when you start to project something. The very basic things as giant screens were coming to massive fruition. And so one of the things that I found was, my alignment through my career has always been with people who are always pushing one level deeper and not just going down like, okay, well, this is just the way we do it. Well, what if we do this? What if we do this? And I know there's folks that I deeply respect out there in the audience that, that do this on a daily basis. They know they can get this much done, but then they just go, well, what if we do this, right? What if we do this? And it's just starting in higher ed, that's one of the things that you really have to start ingraining in the students, I think, is because they come out of high school with a lot of like, okay, just show me the thing and I want to do the thing so I get the grade, right? And they don't go, what am I doing that's not normal? What am I doing that nobody else is doing? What's my personal point of differentiation? How can I look at this from a different standpoint? And the thing that's exciting to me about learning now is the technology is getting more and more accessible, not just because you can do things in real time and all these things, but it's also that you have inputs and outputs that are becoming more and more agnostic. So you really can go like, what happens when this gets plugged into this, right? So you can make visuals off of a freaking spreadsheet, things like that. So I'm always intrigued about finding that little thing out there.
Yeah, and if I may, Trevor, Ben, you bring up a great point about the other key components for me are exposure. Like as soon as I put myself in a situation where, I actually don't know how to do this, but I'm 80% sure I can figure it out. And there's other people involved, that there's collaboration. So Trevor, when you were saying, how do you deal with times when it feels a bit stale? Then I'll look for, great, who else might I rope into something that I would like to learn? They're going to bring a whole bunch of stuff to it as well that I wouldn't have thought of. And then I'm exposed. There's a risk there that I might actually screw up. Maybe I can't figure it out. Or maybe usually we can, right? In the 11th hour, we figure it out. And I think that that's a pretty important component for me to keep things really fresh and to keep the learning going, and to keep inspired. Matthew, I have immense respect for the ability to go into the forums. I struggle with that because it feels dry to me when there's no risk and exposure personally. But many of my students are better than me at just learning technology. I just want to learn that, and that in and of itself is a goal for them that is motivating and juicy.
I think that also the other thing that I really appreciate about the community of people who do this stuff for a living is that there is that sort of, you can call somebody and ask somebody a question, and that's a resounding theme, I think, you'll find if you're new to this forum or to this set of people, is that they do at the end of the day want to have each other's back, and they do want to support each other, and they do. Not everybody has to know everything, but you kind of got to know 1 or 2 degrees of separation of how to get to where you want to go. And that's one of the things I've always appreciated as well. And that's another thing in terms of learning, is it doesn't just have, no man or woman is an island, right? You're only as good as, I think, the people, sort of next to you that know where the answers lie. And so that's another thing to kind of undo with people who are beginning to learn sometimes, is that it's always my work. And you have to go, hey, he did a great, audio rig and touch designer. Ask him and just look at it, modify it, and then you have something you could contribute as well. And so I think that's a really important thing, is community.
Yeah, I think on the community standpoint, everyone jump in if you've ever experienced differently, but I think one of the things I talk about a lot when, someone's coming out of school or in school, in college, and looking at the industry on this side of things, is it feels like there's a huge chasm between the two, but in truth, there's really almost nothing. And that while it can feel weird and daunting, whether I know Matt or I don't know Matt, it's really not that different. If I had a question, you can reach out to anyone in the industry and give them a shout out and ask what's going on, or ask how they did something, or, ask to talk. And it can feel very that can feel very daunting and very exposing, but in actuality, it's really not that big a deal. So I just encourage people to do that. I think one of the things we were talking about a little bit, and Sharon and Matthew were talking a little bit about their difference in forums versus not forums. I think is really important is the ability to be introspective about how you learn, and know that it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So just because a peer of yours can acquire knowledge a certain way, if you can't acquire that same knowledge the same way, it doesn't mean you can't do that thing. It just means you need a different avenue to get there. So I think figuring out, and there's science behind all this, but getting into how you consume knowledge and how you get the ball rolling, both from an emotional and show standpoint, but also just how it processes in your brain, is really important. Because there are some people who we work with who just, give them the manual and they're going to bull their way through it. And there's other people who love consuming tutorials, and there's other people who they need someone to sit down and show them how to begin it. That's me personally. And then like, I'll take the ball from there. So I think it's like, and I think I would pose this to the panel, like, on a granular level, if you think back to some of the, the more recent things that you've dug into, not broad concepts, but actual like a thing, like what is your most comfortable entry point into that stuff?
That's such a lovely question.
I know.
It's a really interesting place. I think one of the pieces that I have to remind myself about, especially recently, is that it's okay for learning to be uncomfortable. It's okay to sit in front of some interface and be irrationally angry that you don't know where the right button is, and you got to search for this thing, and I've got to do this. And I just recently was importing something into Blender from an AutoCAD file and found myself in this same kind of circumstance where I was like, I don't know the right translation between all these mechanisms, so I'm going to kind of sit a couple windows side by side and let myself be, and then take a step back and work through methodically, okay, what are the steps that I can uncover to try and solve this problem? And I think that's one of the things that, we have to give ourselves permission to remember, that it's all right for us to be uncomfortable and to struggle with these pieces, because that's the nature of learning something new, is being exposed to something that's unfamiliar and then finding a way to make it feel familiar.
Oh, Matthew, that's fantastic. There's several periods in every process of learning anything where I cry tears of frustration. Like, this thing is not learnable because I am incapable of learning this. It will. A really great yoga teacher once shared a quote with me: the ego likes to eternalize problems. So whatever you're experiencing right now that's difficult, the ego is going to say, this state that you're in right now is going to last forever. Therefore,
you'll never escape.
And that used to be a moment when I wanted to walk away from things. But you make a great point, Matthew, that whoever you are, there's probably some part of a process where it feels overwhelming or frustrating, or you're full of rage about it, or whatever it is, and that's not something to run away from. That's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to pick up the phone and call somebody.
And and Sharon, you were talking about you are personally presently in that mode right now. Like, how is that going?
So I'm now trying to learn Touch Designer, and I created a container where I've wanted to learn Touch Designer for years. And this is another thing that, at least for me, feels very relevant. There's some times when I can't learn something where it's just that information won't go in. And then I realize, okay, well, a year later, I'm going to pick that up again, and suddenly it all makes more sense. And maybe that's a mystical process. Maybe it's a question of knowing the right people. I don't really know, but I now know that to force my way through it doesn't usually work. So now is the time when Touch Designer is in front of me and it is suddenly accessible. And we were able to purchase some great computers and some licenses for Touch Designer. So we've created a container where I have accountability and I have problems to solve, and we have a deadline, and we're doing all these experiments with different ways of storytelling to help directors and choreographers contemplate different ways of storytelling going forward. And it's going great. I'm managing to achieve all of the things that I've said we could do. And I'm sure that one of the frustrations that I'm encountering is it feels like such a hack job. If I zoom into what I'm doing in Touch Designer, I'm like, oh my God, I hope nobody ever looks at this. But I have achieved the outcome from the outside. So then, Matthew, as you're referencing later, I feel like, great, next time I can go in and figure out how to make that easier or make it more elegant.
That's cool. Ben, do you like, I know there's a lot of new in your world, especially like a huge pivot to online teaching, but what new, because that's the same, right? You're learning how to do that. Like, it's all taking your toolkit and applying it to the task at hand.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think friends and former and current colleagues can appreciate that I'm more of a I just want to get in there and just get and understand. So it's saying that, you know, I'd rather have something. That's what's been the beautiful thing about some of these softwares like Notch and Touch Designer, is that you can get examples and just like rip them apart and like figure out like what's going on, rather than like just like trying to build something from the ground up. And so one of those things is just like, how does this work? You know, let me in there and let me see if I can figure out how this works. Why does this happen? You know, the curiosity of being able to go after something and get into the inner workings of either the computer or the software package or the budget or the way the curriculum is supposed to be set up. Like, I need somebody to show me, like, again, back to the vulnerability thing, I need somebody to be vulnerable and say, here, look at my thing so you understand how this all works. Because principles can only get you so far, but when you actually understand how somebody else has hooked up something or they've laid the path, that really helps me understand which parts I want to do and which parts I don't want to do, or be able to ask like a deep why, like, you know, Matthew, why don't you ever do this? You know, and you're like, oh, because I tried that for years and it doesn't work. I'm like, great, just saved a bunch of time. So it's kind of the same, you know, learning software and designing curriculum in some ways are a lot the same, because you really do need somebody to sort of guide you through the ins and the outs of it. But again, it's I want to understand and just kind of just jump in and freaking do it, because that is where the brain science of, it's to your point, the tears, Sharon, it's like the brain science shows that like under duress, your brain actually remembers. And so that's probably why we're all addicted to the work that we do, but it's also probably why you learn a lot more effectively when you have tension, you know.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up there, Ben, because I think part of what we also have to do is we have to cultivate our curiosity about tools and about techniques. Is we've got to look at the world and say, well, how did they do that? How would I do that? Could I do that? And I used to give students copy art assignments where I'd say, you know, find something, you know, find some 5-second loop, and then your homework is to recreate that. And we do it across the class, all the same project. And then we talk about, oh, what techniques did you use? What techniques did you use? And we use vastly different approaches to solve these problems. And often that was a really rewarding part of that exercise, was to see that, oh my God, there's not only one way to approach this illusion, there's lots of different ways to think about how to solve these problems.
And I think the same goes, like, the cool thing is the same goes for like execution, but also like how you get up to speed, right? Like, you know, Ben's technique talking about curriculum is kind of how I feel like I learn the best. Is like, I always think about it like, you know, it's a sticker on a piece of glass. Like, I need someone's help to like get it going, and then I'll like just leave me alone or rip the rest of it off. But like, as long, you know, you tell me kind of where stuff, and that is to me the biggest barrier for entry, because you have to have the ability to be vulnerable and figure out how to either dedicate the time or money or resources or telling someone that you need help to get going. And I think a lot of times it can make that process a little scary, because it can make it feel like I don't want to get too close to that. I don't need to learn that thing. So I think all of that is part of that. I think all of that is part of that introspection and understanding like what your entry point is, because it's the same thing as the creative process, right? It's like, it's okay that it feels like, you know, we're taught that that's okay to feel uncomfortable and that that's going to be a bumpy ride. But like, you know, but then we're putting the expectations on ourselves that we're just going to know how to do all of the things that we need to do to execute that is not really realistic. We only have about a minute left, so in the last minute, I want to just pose one question and then, you know, surprise everyone. And people might not have an answer, but what is currently on everyone's? Is there something on your to learn list that is, or do you have a to learn list? You know, and what is something that you just have, you know, squirreled away, or how do you handle that? Anyone?
I mean, my thing right now is once you see real time, you can't go back. And I want to be able to teach motion design, what you would typically do in an After Effects type environment or cinema type environment, and be able to do it real time, either in Unreal or Notch or Touch Designer, and do it from like a graphic design standpoint, not necessarily a world building. So I've got to dig in more to Unreal or in Unity so that I can understand what you can and can't achieve from, you know, type design and those kind of things. Because I know the other two tool sets in there. That's what I'm tasked with this summer.
Cool. Well, we only have a couple seconds left, but Matt, Sharon?
Same as Ben. I'd love to do more of a deep dive into VR and helping students and storytellers like look at that environment as a possible storytelling vehicle.
Cool.
I'm doing a lot of stuff with machine learning pieces right now to just kind of unpack other techniques and approaches.
Very, very cool. Well, this was a super fast but really fruitful discussion. Thank you guys so much, and thanks everyone for joining the first panel. And with that, I'd love to throw to the second panel where Ash is leading us through audience engagement. Bye, everybody.